Hey, it's Luke with Out of Darts. We're gonna try something a little different today. I came in early before any of my employees were here, before there were any distractions or anything else going on, and I wanted to talk about Hyper. Now, I'm literally last to making this video, but there's so much to unpack here that I thought it was worth making a standalone video for it. We are also going to have a live stream tomorrow, that's Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, and we'll continue this conversation if anybody wants to come in and ask questions or kind of bounce more concepts and ideas off of each other. So we've known about Hyper for a while, and there's been a lot of rampant speculation, and it's been an exciting sort of thing to follow up, but now we have concrete exclusive content coming from The Verge, and this is coming from Sean Hollister over at The Verge. And I'm not going to read you through the article because I think most of you at this point, if you're watching this, you've probably watched some of the other videos who have literally just sat there and gone through. But this is the first big announcement that I've seen from Hasbro that actually seems like something unique and interesting. So I thought I'd give you my perspective and thoughts, and we'll talk about the different units. But if you haven't read the article itself, obviously you should go there. It's the primary source of the information. And, I think there's some nice things here. We actually got some great community mentions. Coop's video got linked. One of my videos got linked on this article, so that was super cool. Rival is obviously one of my jams. I have always loved Rival. It just felt familiar right from the beginning, and it was just a fun ammo type, and it was a good example of a billion-dollar company making a product that consumers would genuinely want and added value, and people really enjoyed it. Now, Hyper is exciting for a couple reasons. One of the biggest downsides to the Rival ammo is, of course, the size. But let's go through the blasters first, because I think that's sort of a good starting place in case any of you haven't actually seen them. So I'm going to start from the top and go down. This is the Mach 100. Clearly this is a Percy's. There's just no way around it. It looks maybe somewhere between a Nemesis and a Percy's, but it's a Percy's. You've got a hopper up top here, which apparently holds 100 rounds. Obviously we're going to be designing a hopper for this thing. We can talk a little bit more about mods in the future. But we've got a pretty big size battery area here where obviously the D batteries are going to go. This comes in at $70. I'm disappointed and thrilled at the same time with the lack of the rechargeable battery being included, and the reason for that is this: if we can knock $30 off the $100 price of the Percy's, that makes this blaster more accessible for modders. And if you're going to mod it and replace the battery anyway, you just end up with a nickel metal hydride battery that you're never going to use. Now, for the average consumer, I think this is kind of a negative. I would rather have seen the actual nickel metal hydride, because it does not take very long to pay for a nickel metal battery when you're looking at buying standard alkaline D cells. We've got a really interesting rev trigger here, which is just massive. I hope that's a good thing. It looks like the grip's going to be very comfortable. Looks like all the sizing on all of this is very good. They're advertising 110 FPS. We're going to get back to that in a minute, but it basically doesn't mean anything. The FPS is pretty much worthless information. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they're going with these quick reloading paintball style pods, and I think that's a really good route. Obviously, those of us that came from paintball, Drac, myself, and others have been doing the pod thing since the beginning because it just seemed like a natural progression from Rival, or from paintball rather. But now the downside with the paintball tubes is that the large 140 round paintball pods only hold about 50 or 60 Rival rounds, and that's where this lineup is really going to excel, is that capacity. They're claiming about a 4 times capacity gain in the same space, according to the Verge article, the CEO of the product line, or something like that. Next up, we've got the Siege 50, the Hyper Siege 50, and this is a 50-round hopper-fed blaster again, and we've got obviously our nice rounds beautifully sitting in there. It looks like there's sort of funnel mechanisms similar to how the Percy's works out, so I think that's going to kind of be how that works out. And we've got some sort of jam door and, of course, a pump grip. And now, unlike if you happen to see one of my upcoming videos on the Ultra line, this grip actually goes in the right direction. It's got the little retention tab here for to actually hold your hand in there. There's one of the one of the lousy Ultra blasters actually has this backwards, and it just looks stupid and it doesn't function. This is going to have slam fire. I think this is going to be a really competitive offering right out of the box, assuming the ammo type is solid. So we've got some photos in action. I have to say I kind of like this art style direction with the sort of, I don't know, it's almost like martial arts clothing, kind of a neat approach, and really like seeing girls in this. I have 2 daughters, and I would hate to think that Hasbro would continue just marketing only to boys for forever. I think there's a real big untapped market there that doesn't have to be painted purple to get them to actually buy it. I think the closest approximation we're going to have now is looking at one of the X-Shot blasters. You know, it's a pump action blaster. You've just got a hopper back here instead of a tube-fed magazine or internal tube-fed hopper magazine. Obviously the hopper is the easiest way to reload. It is just, you know, stupid simple as far as operation. And I think that's one thing that kids really have suffered with the rival line. Some of them are a little tricky to load. The magazines can be tricky. The Chaos magazine was a nightmare. And even some of the hoppers themselves don't have a big enough opening to really dump rounds in there. And that's why you've seen, you know, extended hoppers, wide mouth loading devices and things like that. And so that looks pretty interesting. I think this shot also gives us here one of the clearest pictures of the size of the ammo. We've got a likely teen, older teen, or at least someone they're trying to pass as that. And if we look at his thumb, these balls are a little bit smaller than the thumb. And I did some quick base measurements, just kind of comparing to my hands and looking at some other hands and just looking at all of these, because on each one of these shots we can sort of zoom in, look at the thumb and the fingers and just say, you know, well, she's obviously a woman and her hands are probably a little smaller than mine. It's about the size of her finger. And so I'm pegging this at 13, 14, between 12 and 15 millimeters. That's a pretty big range, but let's put it in the middle at 13 or 14, and I think we're going to be pretty safe. Ball size, that puts the ball size at a little bit wider than a standard Nerf dart. Just a hair wider, I'm going to guess. So maybe 60% the diameter of the original rival ammo. Going to talk more on that, I promise, but let's get through the rest of the blasters here. Lastly, we've got the Hyper Rush 40, which to me just looks very similar to a Chronos, maybe a strong arm. We've been told the whole top slide, all of this, including the hopper, actually moves, which is a really interesting way, and it means that there's going to be a lot of room for your hand to get purchase on the top of that blaster. I think that's really cool. The price point is a bit on the high side, but considering it does come with 40 rounds and we're pricing these rounds fairly high, I think it's pretty competitive. All of these blasters seem like much, much more competitive offerings than the rival counterparts when they launched. And in case you weren't around or had forgotten, the Zeus came in at $50 and the Apollo came in, I believe, at $25. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But the Apollo was a 12-shot horrible blaster. Like, compared to the rival blasters we have now and compared to this entire lineup, this is a strong, strong lineup, and Hasbro is doing something right for once. My only hesitation is coming up. So look in here again, this is one of the other images where, you know, assuming he's a teen, probably doesn't have adult-sized hands. Looking at his fingernail, kind of just guessing on sizing a little bit, but it's nice to get, we got all this size reference pretty accurately in this one. Here we're showing the loading. I just think this is hilarious. They show the loading like this. Obviously that's not going to work. You're gonna have to put it right down next to it. You're not dropping it from what, 4 inches or something, just hoping that it gets into that little slot. It's gonna be might more finicky than that, I suspect. These canisters look interesting. I think they'll, you know, there's no reason they won't be reasonably durable and usable. I don't think anybody's gonna mount them to the blasters. I would certainly only carry them on my body because all that extra weight flapping around is just a target and kind of gets in the way. So I don't think I'll be doing that. More reload action. So they are going with these canisters, which I think is cool. This reload action is pretty great. Now let's get to the more speculation portion of this video because there's a lot to unpack here. The first is that we're getting a brand new ammo type, and I'm obviously hugely invested into Rival. Is Rival going anywhere? And what can we expect? What we know so far is nowhere near enough to actually give us any indication of whether this is going to be good or not, because to me, absolutely everything hinges on the ammo. Without the ammo, there's just no information. We need to know the density of this ammo to know how far it will fly, and we also want to know what kind of motors these flywheel blasters use. The FPS claims of 110 are completely irrelevant, because I can make one of these shoot 200 FPS by using a lighter weight ammo in the same blaster that would normally shoot 120. So if you took some of the old Headshot, which was a really lightweight ammo because it was half the weight, it would get nearly twice the FPS that you would get out of the standard blaster. And that's just physics. My hope for the line is that this ammo is much more dense, maybe even a dual layer ammo or something. I think that's hopeful thinking, that it has like a solid core or a rubberized core or something like that. But I am hoping that we see some sort of, I hope it's much denser. I hope it weighs nearly as much. These weigh about 1.83 grams generally on average. And I'm hoping that it weighs nearly as much while being more compact, because we're going to get longer flight distances and probably more accurate as well. If we reduce the surface area but increase the density and the weight, and therefore the weight rather, we're going to ultimately have a more accurate blaster. Now, all of this is meaningless until we have the ammo, because lower weight can actually equal lower range. The lighter versions of the knockoff rival ammo, like the cornucopia earlier ones, had the worst ranges possible because they literally were just lighter. So they were more affected by that air resistance compared to their mass as they're flying through the air. So we got a lot to waste there, or we've got a lot to unpack and think about there, and we won't really know more until it's released. I have a couple of thoughts here that I think Hasbro hasn't told us yet. And the first is, I suspect they've actually been holding back on some really key marketing specs. And I could be wrong, but one of the limitations with Rival is how fast you can feed it, and it's just physically based on its size. If you cut the size in nearly half, I suspect that we can double the fire rate of blasters. Whether or not they do that at launch remains to be seen, but I would be shocked if the Mach 100 isn't the fastest firing Nerf blaster we've ever seen. And to me, that would mean an excess of 10 to 12 balls per second, if not even maybe a little bit more. Assuming they took a very similar design to the Percy's with a channel where the balls are funneled in, you're gonna fit twice as many balls in the same section of channel. That blaster didn't look tiny, so I think we're gonna be looking at blasters that can go really high. And on our own, I think we can look at blasters that might be hitting the 30 balls per second mark. That's one of my first challenges as soon as I get one of these, is to see how fast we can get them cycling, because the proton pack that I designed can do 20 rounds a second for forever, continuous. And without making it much, much larger, the actual pack itself, I can't really improve it a whole lot beyond that from what I can tell. But Hyper, I think thrown into the exact same system, just resized, should give us 30 to 40-ish balls per second, which to me is just absolutely hilarious. Should be a very fun modding platform. The ammo is, how do we say it, expensive. Well, the Verge article said, it's one of the cheaper ammos at launch and whatnot. The cheapest we're seeing is 15 cents for a single ball. That's if you, I believe, buy the 200 pack, which is for $30, from my understanding. But that puts it at the same cost or more than the generic ammos, like our own proton rounds and others from Headshot and things, right at the get-go, which is better, but then you start thinking about it's probably a third the material in that ball. So that portion of it, unless there's some quality aspect to the ammo that I have not been made aware of yet or we haven't seen, it makes me a little nervous, and I'm a little skeptical there on the cost. It's also going to take a little while for third-party companies to come out with knockoffs, and obviously they will do it really quickly. It's almost impossible to, I think it's nearly impossible to patent either utility or design for a foam ball that couldn't be circumvented by a different shaped dimple or rivet or whatever on the surface of the ball. So I think we'll see third-party ammo. Obviously, we're going to be working on that as well. It will really just come down to the economics of, is it worth spending the money on getting the molds made for the smaller ammo type, and can we do it well and make a quality product? I think my other huge revelation here is that Hasbro's going to make a proton pack. It's been rumored for multiple companies working on a similar, backpack feeder, but it seems so obvious now with this blaster that they could do it. The question really comes back down to, would they? Because if we're looking at, any size container, like if a Nemesis hopper can now hold equivalent of, say, 300 or 400 rounds, I think we're looking at a cost per round that is just not going to happen, not going to work out very well. So while I think it would be very easy to make a blaster that holds 800 rounds or massive, you start looking at that cost, $100 in ammo cost, and I don't think Hasbro is going to do it, at least not early on. The Prometheus was a $200 blaster. I could see the equivalent in this line at that same price point with maybe a 400 round hopper and even a higher rate of fire. I suspect maybe the high rate of fire blasters are going to be coming later, but it's definitely possible. My next big speculation is on the flywheel size. I am going to go out on a limb here and say that they've gone back to elite style and size flywheels and motors, and they'll still be serrated, but I'm going to guess that these are 130 motors. And I could be wrong, but I think these blasters don't look quite as wide as the Percy's, so because I'm not seeing any bump on the two sides, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say these might be 130 motors. I could be totally wrong. I kind of hope they are, because they're easier to deal with and the smaller ammo type would make sense. My next sort of interesting thought was that if these balls are even close to this size, preferably if they're a little larger, all of our elite systems should be able to fire them. Maybe not well, but we already know that worker serrated wheels in our Jupiter fire these very well. I suspect they could fire the Hyper ammo even more efficiently. There are a couple of other unknowns in this lineup. One of the biggest ones being only a few of these blasters have we actually seen two sides of, but let me go through. So here we're seeing the left side, which should be the screw side. Now, this could be a comp. It is so common in advertising for this whole thing to be mocked up. In fact, she might not even be holding this blaster. I would bet more than likely she's not. But I could be wrong. All of it's done differently as far as ad work and photography goes, but I've been on enough sets to see that it is frequently easier to comp in the talent, have them hold a dummy handle or whatever, than it is to actually shoot all these variations, especially when these are such a curated, narrow view of the product. But anyway, we are seeing the right side of the blaster there and the left side here. So assuming these are not a comp, we are not seeing screws on there. And that's a little disconcerting. Likewise here, we see one screw on the top slide, on both sides actually. There's one back here too, but we see no other screws. I desperately hope we are not headed in the direction of the Phoenix, because I can't handle another disappointment. You guys just don't do it. Don't do it, Hasbro. I'm gonna be mad. So screws are an unknown, motors are definitely an unknown. The dimples on the balls I noted looked a little more pronounced. They're probably a little bit deeper than that of the existing rival ones, or maybe they're the same depth but just crammed onto the smaller ball. My next big concern is cleanup. As a lot of us know, I love using the nut gatherer for cleaning up these rival rounds, and it works really, really well. That said, I don't know that a smaller nut gatherer is going to work very well with the smaller ammo. You're going to pick up a ton of rocks, sticks, twigs. That's already an issue where we play up in the Northwest with the standard version. I think it would only become more difficult as the ball size goes smaller. It's difficult finding these as it is. I think those light green ammo at half the diameter are going to fall under leaves, fall into cracks, fall into storm drains, and just things far worse than these already do. So right off the bat, I'm kind of seeing it as more of an indoor play thing. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe these somehow will be magically easier to see in the grass, but they're probably going to end up being better suited for either indoors or hard surface play like we used to play back in Bern at Brawley Elementary outside. or you know, places like Anywhere where you're at least outside. There's a lot of grass there though, so it makes it a little difficult to find. I find these in my yard all the time. So it's I mentioned earlier, of course, the X-Shot Orbit is very similar. I think these blasters are, another thing I wanted to mention is the size of these blasters. I'm pretty sure they are going to be pretty comparable to our existing blasters. None of these models look like they have small hands. They all look like it's sort of average hands, and they pick people that kind of balance the look of the blaster really well. But I don't think these are tiny blasters. I think the Mach 100 is going to be slightly smaller than the Perseus, and I think the Siege 50 will probably be about the size of the X-Shot Orbit or Meteor, or the Orbit, sorry. If I can ever get those straight in my head. Overall, I am thrilled to see Hasbro try something new. This seems much less of a cash grab, and it does look like it could be extremely promising. On the mod side, I'm obviously going to do hoppers for every single one of these blasters. We're going to do springs for the springers, switch plates and other electronics and motors and upgrade kits, flywheels, all of that for the Mach 100. Assuming this ammo type is not garbage, I will embrace it wholeheartedly. We will obviously, of course, do a proton pack. My own proton pack is releasing in the next week or two here. We're stupid close. It's just getting ridiculous. We are actually printing parts for production now, so true progress has been made. Everything's here. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I am doing a live stream tomorrow. That's Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific here on YouTube. We're going to talk about the Hyper blasters some more. You can ask any questions. If you've got suggestions, things you want to see done when we get them, I'm going to try to get my hands on them as fast as possible, as always. Even if I'm not first, it'll be important to grab these as quickly as we can. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's definitely a little different. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments on that as well, whether this is something I should do more of, where I react to a video or talk about some other content that's out there. This is kind of fun. I'm like here at the warehouse by myself. It's a little bit like the old days, though my employees are amazing. Don't go anywhere, guys. I need you. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, I'm out of darts.